Does universalism kill churches? I get some form of this question. A lot of universalists get some form of this question. It's claimed that if universalism is true, then why evangelize? Why preach the gospel? And Dr. William Lane Craig, like when he made this 12 questions for any would-be universalist, one of his questions was, well, what happened to the churches that embraced universalism? And he talks about the Universalist Church of America and its decline. And I think he also brought the liberal churches as well, and how they're kind of universalists. I'll get into it, and how they're declining. And we see some form of this. Like a lot of people, a lot of Christians like to say, if universalism is true, then why preach the gospel? Why be evangelical? And why live a good Christian life? And I think this is just, honestly, it's a sign of spiritual immaturity. Like, if the only reason that you're preaching the gospel is because of eternal damnation, it's because you're scared people are going to hell, that's just a sign of spiritual immaturity. And the only reason if you're living a moral Christian life is because you're afraid of hell, that's also a sign of spiritual immaturity. Somebody who truly is more spiritually mature is doing it because they love Christ. And if Christ told us to go out and make disciples of all nations, then we should go out and make disciples of all nations, no matter what our opinions on hell are. So I think that's just honestly, it's somewhat offensive. And it just isn't true that universalism discourages evangelism. All we have to do is look at history. Of course, I would claim that the figures of the Bible, particularly the New Testament, are universalists, like St. Paul and stuff. But let's go a bit later into church history. Say St. Basil the Great. St. Basil the Great, great saint, lived in current-day Turkey. And according to him, most of the Christians he knew, and that's in current-day Turkey, were Christian universalists. But according to St. Basil, helped invent the modern-day church charity system, like hospitals, all that good stuff. The modern way that the church helps the poor and all that. That's because of St. Basil the Great. So good for St. Basil the Great. That's really good. I also think of Origen. Now, of course, I know some people are going to be like, "Ooh, Origen." That Dr. William Lane Craig fellow. He's like I was listening to him talk with a woman who talks a lot about progressive Christianity, and he, of course, thinks that she thinks universalism, and I believe he does too, is a form of progressive Christianity, which it is not. And he was like, I have like this smoking gun, like, because he points out how a bunch of universalists like Origen, he's like, well, what kind of universalism? Because Origen did believe in like the pre-existence of the soul and stuff. He did have some wacko beliefs. I'd like to clarify that. But Origen, at the same time, was also a very evangelical person. He did a lot of work to help fight heresies. He really helped develop Christian theology. I've always found it so ironic that we call Origen a heretic, and yet the very people that do that are literally standing on the foundation that Origen built. Like, I cannot stress this enough. The house of orthodoxy, its very foundations are laid by Origen. Like, the house that kicked Origen out 200 plus years after his death, they're all standing on a foundation that Origen laid. So I just think it's insane. But Origen was a very evangelical guy, and he was even tortured to death towards the end of his life. I think of St. Gregory of Nyssa. He helped work on the Nicene Creed, also a universalist. So we do have some examples of evangelical universalists in the early church. Then let's fast forward. Now, of course, there are universalists in the medieval period, but that's a conversation for another time. Then we fast forward a bit to the 18th century, so a few hundred years. We get to the founders of the Protestant Universalist Church. I think of men like John Murray. John Murray, great circuit rider. I think of James Relly, preacher, evangelist as well. We think of all the great early Universalists that laid the foundations for the Universalist Church. And the Universalist Church was built by circuit riders. Like most Universalist churches were founded because the circuit rider ran around and preached. So that is a form of evangelical universalism. And the Universalist Church did extensive missions in the United States, Canada, and the UK. And later in its history, sent out missions to Japan and to Korea. So it's just not true historically that Universalists don't believe in evangelism. And even in the current day, a lot of Universalists are evangelicals. I intentionally named this channel Missionary Universalist for a variety of reasons, but one is to help fight this stereotype that Universalists don't care about preaching the gospel. And a lot of Universalists are actually very passionate about standing up for what they believe and preaching the gospel. Preaching the gospel. I mean, a lot of Universalists feel more empowered to preach the gospel than they ever did before. Like, I talk to people a bunch about Christ because I'm a Universalist. And it's just not true that Universalists are not evangelical, that we do not preach the gospel. It's just not true. Like today, there are a lot, I think of like the work Dave Bentley Hart's doing. He's doing a lot to help spread universalism, help preach the gospel. I don't fully agree with Dave Bentley Hart, but I mean, I think of a lot of Universalists today. They are a very evangelical people. I mean, look at all the Universalist YouTube channels that are around right now that are doing a lot to help evangelize. So it's just not true that Universalists are not evangelical. And if you look at any video on YouTube strawmanning universalism, you'll probably find a Christian Universalist somewhere in the comment section arguing against all the strawman points. So it's just not true that Universalists are not an evangelical people. We have a very long history, and I massively watered it down. I just pointed like 2 examples in our history. There's actually a much larger history of Universalism spreading 2,000 plus years of history. But that's a conversation for another day. So Universalists have been around for a very long time. There are a bunch of Universalists, and many of which have been evangelical. So as for the Universalist Church of America, there are 2 major reasons I think the Universalist Church of America died. Well, yeah, 2 or 3. One is the Universalist Church was a rural denomination. Like most Universalist churches were in the country, particularly rural New England. We were very much a countryman's religion. Like most Universalist Universalists are from the country back in the day. It's a rural man's religion. But as America rapidly urbanized, like America for the first time in its history, more people lived in urban areas opposed to rural. And according to the census or whatever, urban areas, an area with more than like 2,500 people. So I mean, America became a urban nation, and as America urbanized, the youth leave the countryside for work, and a lot of Universalist churches shut down because there just was not young people to fill them because they all moved to the city. And I have to say the biggest reason the Universalist church died is not that it was too Universalist, it's because it wasn't Universalist enough. See, what happened is most of the American Protestant churches began to liberalize in the late 19th century and water down their message and their beliefs and their distinctiveness. And the Universalist church was one of them. We wanted to fit in with the rest of the Christian world and the growing modernism of the day. So we watered down our message. We stopped focusing so much on God's radical love on all people and began to talk of salvation as character development. And this did not happen everywhere. I would like to point this out that there was a conservative minority in the Universalist church till the very end. And even today, though most of them broke off when the merger happened back in 1961, even today there are a few biblical Universalist churches in the UU, which is mind-boggling to me, but there are. And it's just not true that Universalists gave up and just stopped fighting, and that Universalism inherently leads to liberalism. In fact, if you ask me, I think the big reason the Universalist church dies is because we're not distinctive enough. We just became another run-of-the-mill liberal Protestant denomination, and of course, the ones that had more resources last longer than we do. So yeah, I don't think the Universalist church died because it wasn't Universalist, because it was Universalist. I think it died because it lost its distinctive Universalist message and just tried to fit in with everybody else and kind of caved into the world opposed to caved into the rest of the Christian world and just kind of didn't. It lost its distinctiveness. It lost its salt. And I think that's the reason the Universalist church died. Not because it was Universalist, because it was once doing very well. And as for the liberal churches are in massive decline, though other churches are in decline. Like a classic example I always use is the LCMS versus the ELCA. And actually, probably the most common place I've heard the whole universalism equals, these churches are becoming universalist, and this will mean that their membership will just fall off a roof, is our LCMS Lutherans fighting ELCA Lutherans. The ELCA is the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. It is the largest Lutheran church in America. It also is moderate to liberal. It actually has a lot of moderate and even conservative congregations, but the leadership of the church is liberal, and it's experiencing massive membership decline. Meanwhile, the LCMS is very conservative. It is the second largest Lutheran church in America. It is a very conservative denomination, and yet it's seeing about roughly equal decline. Like the LCMS, I cannot stress it. It is about as conservative as the Eastern Orthodox Church. I would have to say on like most LCMS churches, like on their values and stuff. It can rival like the Catholic Church and the Orthodox churches even on their conservatism. Like they're a very conservative denomination by and large. And the LCMS is seeing a similar rate of decline. And unlike the ELCA, which had a few breakoffs which helped hasten that decline, the LCMS is purely due to its own internal, decline. So I don't buy that becoming more liberal. And of course, I'm not a progressive, but I mean, it kind of annoys me that it's like they're saying that these churches are becoming universalist and this is causing their decline. When it's like they're throwing stones with a glass. What is it? Like, you know what I mean? Like throwing stones from a glass house. We don't use that metaphor too much here in the South. That's like a metaphor I had to hear from like online. So I'm still learning it. But enough about my failures to learn the English language. Um, as I was saying, I was kind of talking about the liberal churches. The liberal churches are not really actually universalist, at least biblical universalists. They're more of a agnostic of anything about the afterlife. In the liberal churches, you're supposed to focus on focusing saving people from the hells of this life, so like poverty and stuff, helping them in poverty, which is good. And you're not supposed to focus on heaven or hell. And you can get in trouble in liberal church for talking, especially about hell, but even too much about heaven. You're not supposed to talk too much about the next life. You're supposed to focus on this life, the here and now. And a lot of liberal churches have a bunch of fairly moderate congregations that are also dying off. But in the liberal churches, they don't focus that much on salvation. And a lot of them are not universalists per se. I mean, there's a lot of pluralists, but I would argue that universalism and pluralism are different things. And it's just not true that it's because of the universalism. Like, for instance, there are a lot of people in those denominations that believe in eternal damnation and yet are not evangelical. In fact, there are a lot of people that believe in eternal damnation in all different kinds of churches and yet don't evangelize very much at all. So I just don't buy it that universalism inherently means that you're not going to evangelize. I think the people that have a passion for Christ and a passion to spread the word are going to evangelize no matter what they believe. In fact, I think universalism actually helps increase evangelism because a lot of people are afraid to evangelize that want to, because they're afraid of eternal. They're afraid of telling people they're going to go burn in hell. And for me personally, I feel more empowered to be an evangelist than when I believed in eternal hell. So I don't buy this whole universalism means that you don't evangelize. So does universalism kill churches? Well, the other thing I want to talk about is universalism today. For instance, when I compiled my whole Churches for Christian Universalist list, which if you haven't seen the video, I recommend you go watch it. I actually found a few churches that were founded and they had shut down. And I've found that some Universalist churches are doing very well and other churches are not doing well and some shut down. So I found it very much to be a mixed bag. And I'm not a Universalist because it's popular. In fact, quite the contrary. Like, there are some Christian YouTubers that make it very well. I know as a Universalist, I've essentially signed my own death warrant, like making it big. And I don't care about making it big, but it's like, I know I will never make it big, real big. And honestly, I don't want to, because that would mean selling off being untrue to my principles. And I think that's an abhorrent thing. And honestly, with so much of how mainstream Christian world is today, I don't want to be a part of it. Universalism is not popular. Like, I'm not a Universalist, and many of my fellow Universalists are not Universalists because it's popular. In fact, quite the opposite. Being a Universalist means that you will be persecuted a great deal. It will be very hard for you to find a congregation, unless, of course, you live near some of those Universalist churches I listed in that video. It will be hard for you to find a congregation. It will be hard for you on the online Christian world and the real Christian world. It's not a easy faith to practice. And this is, so yeah, being a Universalist will not make your church popular. Does it kill churches? No, I don't think it does. In fact, a lot of churches can be strengthened by it. I think it would be good for the Christian world if we became Universalist, by and large. I think that if the church adopted Universalism, I think overall, biblical Universalism, I think it would cause more good than harm. But of course, I'm a Universalist, so of course I'm going to say that. So does Universalism kill churches? I don't think it does. In fact, a lot of very strong churches and things have been built because of Universalists. And a lot of great preachers and missionaries and stuff are and were Universalists. So I don't think that being a Universalist inherently is bad for churches. And I don't think that Universalism is... There are a lot of denominations that are going to die off anyways. What I'm kind of saying is that I don't think that universalism is going to kill churches, but nor will inherently save churches. I don't think a church can be just ultimately it's by the Holy Spirit working within the church, and there are some churches that just aren't faithful to the Holy Spirit. Um, so that's just kind of my opinion. No, I don't believe universalism kills churches. Now it can be very hard for you, it can be very hard because most of the time, a way becoming universalist would kill a church is that the pastor becomes universalist, and this has happened time and time again. The pastor becomes universalist, and he loses everything because the congregation doesn't like it, and only about a few people stick with him. And that is a way that universalism kills churches. So I don't think universalism kills churches. The whole universalism discourages evangelism argument is a load. There have been many universalists that have believed very strongly in evangelism, and there are many people that believe in eternal damnation that either don't evangelize or they evangelize in the worst possible ways, like trying to force people to become Christian or doing it in a really cringe way because they're afraid that they're going to fail. And there's so many people that believe in eternal damnation that have traumatized, particularly children, things growing up in the church, and have caused them to turn away from Christianity. So I don't think that universalism kills churches, nor do I think that eternal damnation inherently kills churches either. But I think it's just a massive straw man to say that universalism discourages evangelism and kills churches. Well, y'all have a good day. God bless. Like, subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and Christ will conquer.